I did DNF a book. Wow, January was a good month for audiobooks. This is my favorite book. It was just a great, well-written book. If you're new here, my name is Emmy, and I don't typically do this because not every month is worth mentioning, but January in particular was a really, really good reading month for me. Alright, well let's just begin. I listened to this on audiobook. I wanted to do it that way because I know that Jeanette McCurdy was narrating her own book, so I found that to be really interesting, and honestly, I'm so happy that I did it that way because you could totally feel the emotions, the true feeling and tone that she really wanted to convey in the story. I thought that it was such an eye-opening biography. She did a really good job with her storytelling. It felt like I was reading a fiction, but sadly, it really is her life. It's just really eye-opening. If you haven't read this book yet, I would recommend you actually listening to it. And that's not something I would typically recommend because I'm just kind of getting into audiobooks this year. But listening to it, especially because she's the author and she's the one narrating it, it was certainly a good choice. The next book that I read was All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. I actually read this in my 24-hour reading challenge, which I'll have linked up here. And I actually really enjoyed it. I picked up this book when I went to Target because I saw that she was the author and I was a Crime Junkie fan. So I was curious to see what her take would be outside of podcasting, because I'm sure that she writes her scripts when they do their podcast. It was interesting seeing her as a mystery novel author. I wasn't surprised by any means. I knew that she would do a really good job. It felt like I was listening to an episode. It was a realistic take on what people would typically experience when someone in their family goes missing, having to deal with law enforcement, dealing with the media, and there's so many different angles in how the public could play a role in what the truth is. And I think that she has a really good experience with how people would potentially go through this because of the true crime that she discusses in her true crime podcast. I think she had a really good insight on that. Oh man, I had such a good 24-hour reading challenge. The next book that I read was SoDo is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I loved this book. My fiance and I, we have been watching Breakpoint on Netflix, and that's the perfect way of how I would describe this book. It just goes a little bit deeper into the mind of a tennis player. Wow, you just have so much more respect for their training and the sport after reading this. And to be honest, it's not something that I would typically gravitate towards picking up at a bookstore. A tennis novel? That doesn't sound too interesting to me. I really only gravitated towards it because I knew that a lot of people really enjoyed it. The main character that we're following in this book is a pro tennis athlete who has retired, but she decided to come back into the scene because someone is about to beat her record. If you are someone who likes reading a triumphant story like this and someone who is a little bit more challenging when it comes to the public and how they're typically perceived versus how they truly are, this is a really good book in how that type of character is portrayed. Following this book, also from my 24-hour reading challenge, I read The Risk from the Mindfuck series. The Risk, I would describe it to be like a good palate cleanse. I feel like if you read really long books or you read a lot of fantasy novels recently and you just need something very easy to read, the Mindfuck series is the place for you to go because I think there's only like 182 pages in this book, and this is following an FBI agent. He is on a case trying to find a serial killer. He ends up meeting this girl and then they end up hitting it off and they start dating, and she in fact is the serial killer. So you kind of go through both perspectives of the girl who's the serial killer and understanding her motives behind it, but at the same time going into the FBI agent's perspective of like, oh, this person is morbid, this person's crazy, who would want to do this, why would anyone do this, and you're like, you're kind of sleeping with her. Definitely check your trigger warnings. Some scenes a little bit gory, very horrific, just because obviously what this novel is about, it's about a serial killer. This would be something that I would pick up after reading a really, really long novel or just going back to back to back into different series that I just need a quick break. This is a good book for that. I went back into the Throne of Glass series. I read Air of Fire, and then after that I read Queen of Shadows, but I feel like this is the beginning of the series, truly the beginning of the series, because after this, when we get introduced to new characters, you're just like, oh my gosh, where is this story gonna go? Because the series has taken a turn after Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows, and I did film a video on that too, and I'll have that linked up here as well. I had quite a great experience reading this, especially because you learn so much more about the main character. In this book, Heir of Fire, she goes through a lot of self-loathing episodes, and she is severely depressed because of what has happened in the previous books. I mean, I guess you're just gonna have to read it. I almost spilled. After that, I read Queen of Shadows. This is my favorite book in the whole series. It's that good. I can't even explain it because it's so hard for me to do so without talking about other pieces and other plots that took place in the novel, but just know that I'm looking forward to the next book. That's all you need to know. And I'll be filming that too, so please subscribe if you haven't already, because I'll be continuing on this journey of Throne of Glass, and I'm really loving this so far because Sarah J. Maas is one of my favorite authors. So I did DNF a book. It's called Hush Hush by Lucia Franco. I rated this book 1 star. I wanted to read just like an easy dark romance fix, but what I got instead was just me judging the main characters of this book. It just felt like, yes, they were trying to do the whole women empowerment, but it missed the mark to where it felt like they were almost disrespecting the main characters. And I love women empowerment in books, but I feel like this one wasn't executed well. I just kept thinking, wow, the girls could be so much smarter, but they weren't. Maybe they did become smarter. I have no idea. I didn't finish the book, but honestly, I have no interest in going back to it. So that one was 1 star. That one was a DNF. Oh, I feel like I haven't been giving you the correct order of my reading here, because I also did read One for My Enemy in my 24-hour reading challenge. I forgot to mention that to you, but I read One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. I think this is, the second time that I attempted to read this novel. I was just like, wow, like I want to like it so much because it is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but I think it's the way that the story is structured. It's, of course, trying to take after what Shakespeare has done, but it wasn't captivating to me. It wasn't engaging me enough because the chapters just feel so long, where it was hard for me to keep up of who died, why, are they alive? That was my experience with it. I don't think I'm gonna go back into this. This is another DNF from the month of January. And although I do mark these as DNFs, I still consider them as books that I've read, and I count that in my total reading count. It makes sense to me. And I listened to another audiobook by Frida McFadden. I wanted to give Frida McFadden another try because I read The Housemaid's Secret. I also read The Housemaid. I think the books were okay, but I decided to listen to Never Lie because I also heard a lot of great things about this one. But for some reason, at the reveal at the very end, I felt very underwhelmed, but at the same time I'm like, am I shook right now? Is this a good feeling to have? Never Lie is about this young couple who gets stranded in the snow, and they are stranded in this psychiatrist's house. The wife finds records of the psychiatrist's therapy sessions with some of her patients. But as we uncover things throughout the story, there's more details that come up regarding her patients. Yeah, I just felt kind of underwhelmed, but at the same time, it felt like the reveal was a cop-out. But I know a lot of people like it, so you might like it too. I also read another audiobook. Wow, January was a good month for audiobooks. I told myself I would be more open-minded to reading more audio or listening to more audiobooks this year, so I think I've done a pretty good job with that. The other audiobook that I read or listened to this month was The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. This is by Disha Filia. This is comprised of other mini stories in this novel. Basically, it is painting a picture on what happens behind closed doors of church ladies. So these are people who have devoted themselves in their religion, also some people who practice their religion but are not truly devoted. Some of them have doubts, some of them appear to be one that's really religious in their ministry or in their congregation, but in reality they're cheating on their partners. Some of them are questioning their sexuality. So it's a really, really interesting take on on how people grapple with their identities, especially with religion tied into the mix. Another book that I read is called Love Radio by Ebony Liddell. I really love this book. I rated this book 5 stars, which I'm surprised about because I typically don't rate YA romance novels this high, but this book was 5 stars because it was just a great, well-written book. I typically don't love YA romances because of how they deal with the problems. Obviously it's YA, so there's going to be moments where it's very immature and the way that they communicate, but this is very mature. They deal with their conflicts in such a healthy way that I felt like I learned something from them. So even if you're a young adult or you're an adult my age, which I'm a millennial, I think that you would really enjoy this. We are following 2 seniors in high school. They're navigating life in their adolescence and also trying to get into a relationship with each other when you're learning so much more about yourself and also trying to make room in your heart for other people. Things don't always go your way, so I would definitely recommend this book. But yes, those are all the books that I read in the month of January. I hope that you got some recommendations out of this. Books that stood out to me were Jennette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died, obviously the Throne of Glass series, Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, Love Radio, oh, and Taylor Jenkins Reid. That's another great book. My next video I'll be posting is of me reading Black authors only, and I spoke about some of those authors here today. I hope that you still enjoyed this video. Again, let me know if any of these books are going to be ones that you'll be reading in the month of February, or maybe ones that you'll add to your TBR. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye. Testing. I feel like I look a little purple. Oh my goodness.